Hey guys, and welcome back. So before I jump into my review and breakdown of Lovecraft Country episode 2, I have found out some information. Apparently this show is not based directly on H.P. Lovecraft's work, or works. I honestly don't even know what Lovecraft wrote. Did he write books, or one book, or stories, or short stories? I don't know. But whatever. It's based on a more recent book by an author named Matt Ruff, and the book, well, it's called Lovecraft Country. And I'm going to assume, based on the title and the fact that we've got tentacle monsters in this show, that his book was inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's work. So it's like once removed. But I've not read his book, and I don't plan to, at least not until after I'm done with the show, or at least done with this first season. But okay, so my review. As I did the first time, I'm going to begin with a general non-spoilery review and then move into a more detailed spoilery breakdown. So, episode 2. I have to say, episode 1 set such a high bar that I was honestly a little bit disappointed by this second episode. It wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I really liked it. But the first episode, to me, was damn near perfect. And the second episode just did not reach that level of perfection. For example, as I mentioned in my review of episode 1, I loved the tone and the ominous feel, the slow building of tension. It all worked together so well, but this episode, things felt scattered, like the pacing was inconsistent. I also felt that at times we were either not given enough information or given too much information too quickly so we couldn't take it in. At one point, I actually had to check that I was watching episode 2 because I was so confused that I thought I might have missed an entire episode. But okay, so far this is making it sound like I hated this episode, and I didn't. It's being held up to such a high standard because the first episode blew me away. But the second episode could not be the same as the first episode because it's accomplishing something different. The first episode guided us, the viewers, from the real world in which the scariest thing were racists into a world with magic and monsters. This episode, the second episode, begins with us already in the world with the magic and monsters. So it can't do what the first episode did because it doesn't need to. We're already there. And once again, much like in episode 1, I have to applaud the music choices. I know some people might not like having is the word anachronistic? Like having modern music in a period show, but personally, I love it. All the music choices just hit right for me. They set a tone and they create this great atmosphere. But beyond music, I didn't actually mention this in my review of the first episode, but there's a section of that episode where instead of music, there's an excerpt from James Baldwin, prominent civil rights activist, a speech that he gave called The American Dream and the American Negro. And it's played over part of their journey through these counties where they are not welcome. And I know some people might find this a bit heavy-handed. It makes it very plain what the narrative is trying to get across. I personally loved it. And that was done again in this episode. It wasn't a speech in this case. It was a spoken word poem called Whitey's on the Moon. And the scene it overlays is, in my opinion, enhanced by this music choice or soundtrack choice, I guess. I do wonder if I'm going to end up mentioning music in every review because it's a really standout feature of this show for me. Anyway, back to the show. As I said, we are full on into the world of magic and monsters now, but the narrative has not abandoned the theme that it established in the beginning of the monsters being less of a threat than racism. But in this episode, the racism has become more nuanced. It's less cartoonish racists yelling the N-word and more intellectual white people talking about how everything has its place. And you see in this episode how even these kind of racists are just as dangerous as the first kind. So I didn't give a rating in my first review because, to be honest, I didn't think of it. But, well, now, if I was giving a review for episode 1, I would say it is a solid A+, in my opinion. This episode is going to get a B+. It's still a good grade, it's just not as good as the first. So now I'm going to go into a more detailed spoilery breakdown. So if you don't want to be spoiled, turn away now. So, this episode begins with an absolutely inspired and awesome music choice. Moving on up, the theme song from The Jeffersons. It's the best theme song of all time. And it's the one I always think of whenever I find myself thinking, whatever happened to theme songs? I miss theme songs. But okay, we begin with moving on up. And Letty and George are both absolutely loving the rooms that they're in. The books, the clothes, and I gotta say, I am loving Letty dancing. In fact, in my notes for this episode, I literally wrote, more Letty dancing, please. And then the scene flashed back to her, and she was still dancing, and I wrote, thank you, because it was delightful. But okay, of course, I was also kind of confused because they should not be so happy. They are in the home of some suspicious ass white people, and they literally saw people being eaten by monsters the night before. They should be freaking out. But then the show suddenly agrees with me, and we see Tick. We cut to Tick, and he's in his room and he's freaking out, or at least he's realizing that something really weird is going on. They come out of their rooms, and George is all, they have all my favorite books, and Letty's all, these clothes fit me like a glove. And just as an aside, they do. And Tick is still the only one who thinks that things are weird. The suspicious white guy shows up, and he is like a silent cat. He just appears. He keeps doing that throughout this episode. And okay, this is where one of the things I mentioned before shows itself for the first time. He begins walking them through this house to, like, he's taking them to a place to eat. And he's talking about the owner of the home, a Mr. Braithwaite. And this scene is very much an exposition dump scene. He's just giving all this information, but it's very odd. Like, there's a lot of things, including like the name Mr. Braithwaite, that everybody is talking about as if they all know this context and this information, and I know nothing. And I felt like I had missed some important information. This is the point where I stopped and double checked to make sure that I was watching the right episode, because I was like, I don't know, what are they talking about? I have no idea what they're talking about. But okay, during this conversation, we do get confirmation that Tick's father left Chicago with this particular suspicious white guy. So this was actually pointed out to me in the comments of my previous review. I'm not sure how I missed it, but I did. So Tick's father was here, but now he is apparently not. They sit down to what I guess is breakfast, and when they're finally alone together, we figure out that somehow Letty and George don't remember anything from the previous night. But instead of being like, Tick, you crazy monsters, what are you talking about? They are actually suspicious because they realize that their memories are gone. This is something I found really interesting because I fully expect them to just dismiss everything that Tick said. But they are smarter than that, and I liked that. Of course, we do get an aside, like a conversation, brief conversation a little bit later between Letty and George, where Letty's like, hey, what happened to him in the war? Maybe he's shell-shocked and that's what's going on. But it's a very brief conversation. It happens a little bit later, and it's not particularly important to the narrative of this episode anyway, so maybe it'll come up later. After they've finished eating, they go for a walk just around the town, and they encounter a very unpleasant white lady guarding a stone building. She's got these vicious dogs. And here, once again, we encounter one of the odd pacing issues. Through putting together some clues, George figures out that Tick's father is being held in the basement of this building. And I know we are meant to believe that George is right, especially because later on it's confirmed that he was right. But it happened so damn fast. And the logic that George uses to figure this out, it feels flimsy to me. I wish that they had spent more time on this or given us a better explanation, because it doesn't feel earned. So then we have them walking back to the house, and it's suddenly sundown. And to me, this is, again, some weird pacing. What we have seen so far is them wake up, get dressed, eat a meal, either presumably breakfast or lunch, go for a walk, meet a lady, look in a building, and now it's nighttime. It does not feel like it should be dark yet. And yet it is dark enough that, well, okay, let's backtrack a little. While they're walking in the dark, they figure out that Tick is a direct descendant of a slave who used to work at this plantation, I guess. She escaped this plantation while she was pregnant. She fled the manor house when it burned down in a fire. This is important later on, but okay. Back to the sudden darkness. It is suddenly dark enough for there to be monsters again. Sudden monsters, and they're very scary, and but then we get that high-pitched whistle again, and this time we see the mysterious white lady coming on a horse, and we also have the unpleasant lady with the dogs. And George and Letty's memories are immediately wiped, but this time they realize it's happened right away. The white lady takes them back to the house, and she takes Tick to a room in the manor house where a guy's literally having part of his flesh cut out from him, and it's gross. And then he sits up and it's the bad guy from Ghost. And just as an aside, I totally feel really bad for this actor because I've seen him in a few things, and this is what I think every time I see him. It's just, hey, it's the bad guy from Ghost. Anyway, Ghost Guy, who it turns out is Mysterious White Lady's dad, so I'm going to call him Ghost Dad. So after Ghost Dad has basically part of his stomach cut out, he sits up and he starts exposition dumping. Basically, it's just all about how everything and everyone has its proper place in the world, and things are best when everything is in its place. But in this moment, we see that his daughter, who we learn at some point later that her name is Christina, and I kind of like her, I think. So I'm going to start using her name. So Christina does not seem particularly pleased with her place in the system that her dad is espousing. Meanwhile, George is in his room, and somehow he finds a secret passage that leads him into a room where he finds a book of rules for a secret society. And this, once again, it's an okay, how on earth did George find the exact right book to help him find this passage? Maybe if I knew Lovecraft stuff, this would make sense, but from what I saw, it's just him looking at a bookshelf, getting a look on his face, and pulling out the right book, and boom, secret passage. Okay, back to Ghost Dad and Christina. Well, Ghost Dad actually leaves, and Tick is alone with Christina, and basically he deduces that she is a witch, and has put a spell on his friends to keep them from remembering. And once again, I feel like this is a leap in logic that was not earned. Why on earth does he assume that it's her, and not, I don't know, Ghost Dad, or the unpleasant dog lady who was also there with the whistle, or the weird white guy, or some other like mystical, magical thing that no one has any control over? I feel like the characters in this episode are making a lot of right guesses, and it is moving the plot forward, but it also feels like it's happening too fast. But okay, he guesses that she's a witch, and he asks her to remove the memory spell from his friends, and she does. And this moment actually made me laugh out loud, because when she removes the spell, you immediately hear
done
screams coming from Letty and George's room as their memories return, and that just cracked me up. But then George tries to go to them, and he is locked in his room by some sort of spell. There's like a force field thing. Christina is standing right there. He was right that she's a witch, but he doesn't ask her to let him out. Like, to be fair, she probably would have said no, but it still seems super weird to me that he didn't even ask. Like, he just backs up into his room. Christina then goes off and helps a cow give birth to a monster. I'm like, this is a weird sentence, but I'm not kidding. She runs off to a barn, she sticks her hand up a cow, like up to her shoulder, and pulls out a monster. I think what we're supposed to focus on here is the revelation that they are breeding the monsters that we have been seeing, but I couldn't focus on that because they make a point to mention that Christina's never done this before. This is her first time, and you don't just shove your arm up a cow's vagina. Like, I'm not a veterinarian or a farmer or anything, but I feel like you need some kind of training to do this, or at least guidance from someone who knows what they're doing. She could have just torn up that cow's insides. Like, it just doesn't feel right. We are then, we flash to Letty's room, and Tick is there, which initially confused me because, you know, we saw him locked in his room, but we soon realized that this is some sort of magical vision or hallucination or something. All three of them are having them. They're having separate visions, and we cut between them. So I'll just go through them one by one. Letty is seeing Tick, and it starts off, it's romantic, and they kiss, and then they begin like getting busy, and, you know, Tick starts to undo his pants, and he's got a snake dick. That's not good. George is seeing a vision of some woman he was in love with who is now dead, and I'm pretty sure she is Tick's mom. I honestly was suspicious of him from the last episode, but I didn't mention it because George looked super guilty when Tick mentioned his mom. So I think George hooked up with Tick's mom and is probably Tick's father. Anyway, they have a lovely dance together, although George knows that it's not real, and she starts promising him stuff, and then he backs away and she just disappears. Tick is seeing someone from Korea, a woman named Jia, who attacks him, and she stabs him, and they have this badass fight, and he eventually kills her by choking her. In the middle of this fight, though, she yells something, and I gotta tell you, I rewound this maybe 5 times trying to see if I could understand what she was saying, because, like, sometimes, you know, details of plots are revealed in foreign languages, and if you can understand that language, you can get secret information, I guess. I understand some Korean, so I thought maybe I would. I rewound it, and I could not make anything out. And then I turned on the subtitles and it says she is saying something in the language of Adam, whatever the hell that means, but whatever. It's not Korean, so I just wasted a bunch of my time. So as I said, these 3 scenes are intercut with each other, and then we sort of back out of all of them and we see that there's like a group of white people just sort of watching these scenes play out. Like they have these magical windows open through which they can see into these 3 rooms, and they're just watching them. And it, again, here I felt like I was missing something. Like, this is never explained, like in this entire episode. Maybe it'll come up later, but we are never explained if this is like a normal part of these gatherings to have people there and then just like mess with their heads for entertainment. I don't know what this was. I have no idea. But okay, George and Tick are invited to join the party. Letty can't because vagina, and George and Tick, you know, penis. But when George and Tick arrive at the party, it turns out they're not particularly welcome because black. But okay, you remember that book of rules that George found? Yeah, me neither. But okay, in that book, George found a rule that says that any direct descendant of the founder of the society can give commands to the rest of them. Tick is a direct descendant, so Tick commands everyone to leave. And again, this to me felt super rushed. They literally barely sat down. We didn't get to see any creepy ritual shit. I mean, okay, we did see Ghost Dad try to serve everybody a piece of his stomach flesh, but we didn't even get to see anybody eat it. Like, it's supposed to be creepy. Why they just sat down and then they get up and leave? It happened so fast. So once everyone is left, Tick orders Ghost Dad to return his father to him, and Ghost Dad's like, all right, whatever. But he does reveal that the original Mr. Braithwaite had used something called the Book of Names to put spells on his body to make himself more powerful. And as a descendant, Tick has he's a reservoir of this power. So he just tells him that, and then I guess that's the end of that scene. I don't know. But George and Tick go off to the place, remember before, that George somehow deduced was where Tick's father was being held? Tick's dad's name is Montrose. I'm going to just say Montrose from now on. But Montrose is now gone. But once again, George just figures stuff out. He literally looks around and goes, the Count of Monte Cristo. He tunneled his way out. Which just, again, how on earth did George do this? There are 0 clues. I guess what they're going for is George is a genius and he can just do this. But it just feels like they are missing steps in the writing. The teacher in me is just screaming, show your work. You have to show your work. Otherwise, it feels like cheating. But okay, Montrose tunneled out and somehow he sealed the tunnel up behind him. It's the classic Shawshank problem. But okay, they meet up with him where he eventually, you know, escapes and tunnels out and breaks free. And here we get some exposition that is done really well. This shows that they know how to do this. He is stunned when he sees them there. And when Tick is like, no, you wrote for me to come, Montrose is all, I didn't expect you would actually follow a letter that I obviously wrote under duress. And this reminds me back to the first episode when they're reading the letter and commenting on how it doesn't even sound like him. And then Montrose also mentions that Tick never listens to him, so we really didn't expect him to come. This is good. This is giving me all the steps in the plan, all the pieces, and it didn't take long. It's like 3 lines of dialogue. This is what I would have liked to have seen from those other moments that felt rushed through. But okay, they are escaping, but no. We get a super cool crash scene because the grounds are like sealed up by some sort of magical barrier because, you know, Ghost Dad doesn't want to let them leave without Tick helping him in this ceremony that we learn about. And in order to ensure that Tick is going to participate willingly, Ghost Dad shoots Letty, who fucking dies. I mean, at least she seems to die. I was mad. I was like, you can't kill Letty. No. It's the whole reason I started watching the show in the first place. But okay, then he shoots George. Also sad, but I mean, George and Letty. I'm going to go with Letty. But okay, later on we do see that Letty is healed, and Ghost Dad has promised to heal George too after Tick, you know, willingly participates in this ceremony that George Dad wants to do, that he thinks will open a gateway to the Garden of Eden, and then he'll walk through this gateway and he'll get eternal life. So next we get the ceremony. And this scene to me was incredible. But I think what made it incredible was the absolutely perfect choice of music. Or, okay, it's not music. It's that spoken word poem I talked about before, Whitey on the Moon. The poem is about how white people have spent time and money and energy to do something really extravagant, but also kind of ultimately useless, as putting a man on the moon, while the poet is worried about things like paying rent and doctor's bills and rat bites. And in this scene, we see a white man going to extraordinary lengths to do something also really extravagant, to open a gateway so he can achieve eternal life. And when the gateway begins to open, it reveals the image of a pregnant slave. The contrast is really stark. You know, the founder of whatever this organization is called had all this time and money and energy to come up with this organization and this plan. And here we have a pregnant slave who's just trying to survive. I honestly feel like without this poem, this scene would almost be silly. But the poem, with the poem over it, it's kind of powerful. Anyway, the ceremony does not go well. When preparing him for the ceremony, Christina had given Tick a ring that inducted him into whatever the name of the society was. And during the ceremony, some sort of darkness kind of starts to emanate off of the ring during the ceremony. And so I suspect that Christina did something to it. Basically, the gateway to the Garden of Eden explodes, and it turns Ghostad and all the other Whiteys? All the other Whiteys in the room. Damn it. Whitey on the moon, Whitey's in the room. Sorry. It turns all the Whiteys into stone. Damn it. Oh, sorry, cracking myself up. All right. It turns all the white people, or the Whiteys, into stone. And then the house begins to collapse. And upstairs in the room, we have George, Montrose, and Letty. They are able to get out of the room and escape because I guess the magic has been lifted or something. And Tick follows a vision of his ancestor, the pregnant slave, as she runs out of the house. When we meet up with the others, we find that George has died in Montrose's arms, and damn. It's sad, but also I really, really, really wish I had included predictions in my previous review, because I fully thought that George was going to die. Like, in that episode, the entire episode, I was expecting him to die. There were just too many sweet moments with his wife for him to survive. But then he did survive. But now he's dead, and I wish I told you that I had guessed that he was going to die in the previous episode. But okay, whatever. That's the end of this episode. And yeah, as I mentioned several times, my main issue with this one was rushing through things that I felt like needed more, or at least they needed better explanation. But on the whole, I still really enjoyed it a lot. But because I didn't give predictions last time and I regretted it, I'm going to do it this time. I think Christina survived the house collapse and that she's going to come back, and I think she's an ally to our main characters. I'm not sure about the suspicious white guy, but if he does come back, I don't think he's on our team at all. I do think that George is Tick's father, or was Tick's father. I guess he's dead. Although I think that's actually pretty much confirmed in this episode. But other than that, I honestly don't know what's happening next. And part of that is because this episode feels like it wrapped up the entire main plot. Like, we left Chicago to find Montrose, and we found him. We're done. There are still mysteries. I'm still, curious about what happened in Korea, but, well, the main mystery has been solved, so I don't even know how to begin to guess what could happen next. I will note one thing I noticed when Tick was following his ancestor out of the house. At one point, she turns and looks at him, and the camera lingers, and we can see that she's holding a book. I think this has to be one of the magic books that they were talking about, like maybe the Book of Names or the other one, that name I can't remember. I don't know why, but I think that's what she's got. So, before I end my breakdown, I thought I would mention my favorite and least favorite moments from the episode. Weirdly, I kind of have two for each category in this episode. I'm not sure if that's going to be standard, but that's what I've got for this one. So I'm going to start with my least favorite, because that way I can end on a positive note. So one that I absolutely hated from this episode has got to be Snake Dick. Because, good God. Okay, I'm not a particularly big fan of that organ, just in general, but this was unsettling. And I know it's meant to be. They succeeded. This is a moment that I do not enjoy. I know I'm not supposed to, but I just don't. And if I was going to rate this moment, well, y'all know I kind of suck at rating things. So it's time to break out the Lesbonomics app. So here we go. I'm going to put in Snake Dick. into the app, and we'll see how this moment is rated. Okay, so according to the Lesbianomics app, Snake Dick is rated as when your mechanical pencil lead breaks and the metal tip scrapes the paper. I just got goosebumps, like bad goosebumps. Oh, I hate when that happens. Yes, that is a very appropriate descriptor for this moment. I hate that. Now on to a favorite moment. Or, well, this one is moments, I guess. It's Letty's outfit. Hey, damn. I know this is not important, but good God. This outfit just looks so good on her. And damn, if it doesn't fit her well. Just like, yum. Everything about it. It's delicious. It's delicious. Okay, so putting this moment into the Lesbianomics app, Letty's outfit, and the results are, yes, chocolate chip cookies, still warm from the oven. Well, that's a little on the nose, but yes, yummy. Absolutely yummy. But now we move on to a more serious least favorite moment. And this one too is least favorite moments, plural. For me, it's all those scenes that felt rushed, where characters are figuring things out and jumping to conclusions, and their conclusions are inevitably correct, but I don't feel like their conclusions are deserved or earned. So, okay, putting this into the app, rushed scenes. And it's processing, and the results are, interesting. Okay, getting a parking ticket despite paying for parking because of a confusing sign. Yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly what these scenes feel like, because it's like, yeah, okay, fine, I get it, but I'm still not happy about it. That's exactly right. And now, my favorite moment. It has to be the ceremony. As I mentioned before, I think maybe if it wasn't for the soundtrack of Whitey on the Moon, this would have just been a camp and cheesy moment, but somehow the soundtrack elevates it beyond what it is and makes it amazing. So, gonna put this moment in the app, the Garden of Eden ceremony, and see what we get. Ooh, interesting. Okay, this one is mixing two leftovers and the result is better than either original. That is an excellent rating for this moment. Yeah, we've mixed two things together and we've gotten something better. I mean, okay, the poem Whitey on the Moon is pretty much perfect anyway, but yeah, mixing these two things together made this so much better. It's fantastic. So, okay, this has been my review and breakdown for episode 2 of Lovecraft Country. All in all, I am still really enjoying this show and I am fully on for the ride. And I guess I'll end here. I will link to my Patreon and my Discord in the description below. And as always, like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.